My name is Alex Williams, founder of The New Stack, and you are listening to the New Stack Analyst Podcast, the show about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. Thanks for joining us. The Cloud Foundry Foundation is our sponsor for our Pancake Breakfast at Cloud Foundry Summit in Boston, Massachusetts. Cloud Foundry is used by enterprises around the globe to automate, scale, and manage cloud applications throughout their life cycle. Learn more about Cloud Foundry at cloudfoundry.org.
All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the New Stack Pancake Breakfast, sponsored by Cloud Foundry Summit. Let's give a big hand for the Cloud Foundry group. Woo! This is our first breakfast of the world tour for 2018. We're so happy to be here. And what we really are going to talk about today is the community. I think it's so important right now to talk about the community. And embodied in the community really are the deeper issues that face you as technical professionals, as engineers, and as developers. And so we really want to have a discussion that centers on where is Kubernetes now? Where is Cloud Foundry Summit? What's the intersection? What is the state of the community as we see it currently? So I have some great panelists on stage, and I'm just going to go to the slides here because I always end up mixing it up. But Abby Kerns, the Executive Director of the Cloud Foundry Summit. Abby, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for remembering my name.
Jennifer Kotzen of SUSE, how are you?
Well, thank you.
Chen Goldberg of Google, and Frederic Lardinois of TechCrunch, of course. No one needs to introduce Frederic, but so let's just get started right away with some conversations here. And what we're really trying to do is make this a conversation with everyone here. And so if you've already got your pancakes, does everyone have their raffle ticket? Raise your hand if you don't have a raffle ticket yet. Okay, we're giving out Arduinos. We're giving out an Arduino today, and here's the deal. If you ask a question, you get 5 additional raffle tickets. So your chances of winning the Arduino go up exponentially. Of course. So we're going to really encourage you to kind of ask some questions here, because that's really what makes these breakfasts what they are. We really like that participation. But before we get started, Abby, I wanted to direct this question to you. When in Basel last year, you guys announced that there would be this, but really this was a much deeper integration with Kubernetes, right? And now today, your survey showed 18% of Cloud Foundry users are using the new runtime with Kubernetes, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So can you tell us what those people said, those 18%? What are some of the things that you took away from that?
Well, I think it's a little bit more than just the usage of Cloud Foundry Container Runtime. And for those of you that don't know what Container Runtime is, we announced it last October. And it was essentially a rebrand of Kubo, which is Kubernetes on Bosch. And what that really indicates is there is an appetite for Kubernetes to run alongside Cloud Foundry. There is an appetite to have a choice and flexibility on workloads. And more importantly, there is a desire to do this in the enterprise at scale. And so all of these things collectively allow our users to do that.
Okay.
And they're excited about it. And those are people that are using it now. I would suspect by the time we do our second user survey later this year that number will go up.
So what does that mean for Cloud Foundry then, if we're seeing this migration toward Kubernetes overall in the community? Where does that place Cloud Foundry as that integral part in the overall community itself?
I think we've spent a lot of time discussing what is Cloud Foundry. And Cloud Foundry, for us, really represents more than just a singular technology. Cloud Foundry is the best platform for developers, period. And that technology needs to evolve underneath that, and it needs to grow. And if Kubernetes, or last year like OCI, Run C from OCI, or CNI, or other technologies can continue to make that the best platform developers, then that's what we should really consider and figure out how we can bring that in or run it alongside.
Frederic, any thoughts?
Always. If I'm looking at what the CNCF is doing with Kubernetes, don't they want to do the same thing to some degree? Don't they also want to roll all of this together, this collective of open source projects, and become the best platform for developers too?
That's a good question for Jen to answer.
Sure.
You were supposed to say what you think, not to ask more questions. That's nice. CNCF is not bringing everything together like Cloud Foundry, and it does gives a lot of choice. And we will see more and more projects evolve under the umbrella of CNCF. And definitely from Kubernetes perspective, if you think about the developer experience, Kubernetes is investing in creating primitives and extensions to allow different developer experiences on top of Kubernetes. And this is where I think Cloud Foundry and Kubernetes can be complementary.
Okay. We have Joab Jackson, managing editor of the New Stack, who has the mic. Does anyone have any initial questions for the crowd? We just get started.
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
I guess for Abby, but for anyone in general, I understand Kubernetes, the value of it for the infrastructure operator who has to manage the Cloud Foundry deployment. But what benefits does Kubernetes bring to the Cloud Foundry developer, the one using Cloud Foundry as a service?
What does Kubernetes bring to the developer experience in Cloud Foundry?
The Cloud Foundry end user, yeah.
Well, I mean, Kubernetes is fantastic. It is an amazing, what started as a container orchestrator, and I think Hen really illustrated this great yesterday on the main stage in terms of the arc and the story of Kubernetes. But I think it's done a great job of really evolving quickly. I think we can all agree that it is, from a technical standpoint, has evolved so quickly, particularly in the last 18 months. And I think for us, it brings together the best of breed capabilities around that. And I think there's always an opportunity to continuously improve. And in technology, if we're not always striving to continuously improve, then what are we doing and how do we move forward?
I think that what Kubernetes in general is doing as part of the umbrella of CNCF, we are promoting a lot of open standards. And Cloud Foundry is a great partner and leading some of those open standards as well. And this is something that every user of Cloud Foundry or Kubernetes is really benefiting from because it allows those composable systems, right? So if you're thinking about things like Open Service Broker, we're talking about container storage interface. I talked yesterday on stage about Istio, and I went 2 days ago and I watched there is a Cloud Foundry Istio project already on GitHub, and it's being developed actively. And I think all of that is where the user really benefit because we talked about the balance between consistency and flexibility. And by having all of that, Cloud Foundry and Kubernetes users can have consistencies, which is broader than just the Cloud Foundry scope. So if you want to manage more workloads, for example, then you can do it in a consistent way.
Yes, I'd like to add also, in our experience at SUSE, the customers that we deal with are never satisfied entirely with Kubernetes or with Cloud Foundry. Most of them require two different models, sometimes intermixed and sometimes independently. So no customer we have talked to will ever turn down the productivity that they can get from using Cloud Foundry. But many of them also need the flexibility that Hen's talking about for certain parts of an application or certain services. And in particular today, many ISVs, many of those services that we want to connect to through service brokers are delivering their services in a containerized form. So having the Kubernetes platform available to manage those and make them available to the Cloud Foundry application is a powerful story. So bringing those two together is something that we think is really important. Again, emphasizing the flexibility that you get when you're deploying something on Kubernetes or using that with the power and the productivity that developers get with Cloud Foundry. That's a combination that we think is incredibly powerful.
So I have a question then for the audience. How many people here are using the new Kubernetes runtime? Could you tell us why you're using it, and is anyone else using it?
Over here.
Who would like to? I would just like to hear from you, like how you're using it, why you're using it. Are you with Pivotal? Okay, well. Yeah. Anyone else?
I think it would be great to hear from them because I know that they're on the lab team. Graham is.
Well, yeah. Well,
Calling you out, Graham.
maybe you guys could just talk about the experiences that you've had and you've seen people have.
Yeah, so I'm in Pivotal R&D. I'm a software engineer, and I'm currently working on Project Riff, which is a nascent FAS project. We're pretty all in on Kubernetes as the target platform, so of course we have a lot of stuff where we're working with different Kubernetes distributions, platforms, targets, that sort of thing. One of which, of course, for us has to be CFCR, right? We know a lot about it. We have a lot of love for Bosch, so that works really well for us. Kubernetes as a source of primitives, to your point, is really quite outstanding. We can often find a way to express relatively orthogonally what we need to express. And we're also able to give back feedback on the things that we found difficult while we look for that similar CF push-like experience, you know, the ONSI haiku of, here's my source code, run it in the cloud for me, I do not care how, rather than, here's my source code, and also a very large toolbox with a whole bunch of different tools that you're going to have to learn first. Okay, now I need to build the house. No, wait, no, I need to, no, wait, is that the right wood? Can somebody give me a book here? What was I trying to do? Oh yeah, deliver value, yeah, and run it in the cloud for me, I do not care how. Free sales pitch for Riff.
So do we have any other questions?
Thank you. I wanted to ask what the relationship is between Cloud Foundry and the CNCF, and what are you looking at to kind of bridge that?
Thanks, Lauren. Well, we like to think of CNCF, and for those of you that don't know what CNCF is, it's the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And we think of it a lot as our sister in the cloud native world. And there is a lot of opportunity for us to collaborate with them. CNCF is an amazing collection of new and emerging technologies. Kubernetes is just but one of the technologies that are coming through there. In fact, they have a lot of technologies there that were formerly part of Cloud Foundry, like NATS and etcd. But there's also projects like Open Tracing and Prometheus. And so I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to work collaboratively with CNCF and its collective, because that's where a lot of these technologies are being incubated, built out, and tested and run. And so as those technologies mature, there is certainly an opportunity, as enterprise particularly wants to use those, to bring those in and or run alongside Cloud Foundry, again, giving developers the best opportunity and the best platform. And to add on to your point, giving them the tools and the technologies to do that at scale.
So I wanted to ask a question of Jennifer. We ran a story about one of your engineers about really where Cloud Foundry is right now and kind of your thinking, and where Kubernetes is in your thinking. And one of the things that is stated in the article is that containers are the new virtualization. Does that mean that containers, can you kind of expound upon that? Because you could take a lot from that statement. You could say that containers are replacing virtualization. You could say that containers are the new thing, so then what's going to be the new thing after it? There's so much that comes with a statement like that.
Yeah. The way we see containerization as a form of virtualization is, for this audience, is mostly think of it as a new infrastructure for us to be working on going forward. So we've all dealt with hardware infrastructure and platforms that abstract above that for us. We see containerization as a new infrastructure, and it's important for us. I mean, I know that we're interested primarily in the developer experience here, but when we think about where we're going with cloud native and DevOps, there is an ops piece here. Ops is important. And our ability to integrate dev and ops and produce something that is good across the board, end to end, is important. So using containers and containerization infrastructure is part of the operational piece that maybe we don't worry about at the API level when we're building an application, but is really critical when we go to deploy and manage that application. So having a modern infrastructure, a container-based infrastructure for our modern platform is important going forward. And so again, at SUSE, we're working to deliver against that.
So for the engineers here, so the people who are maybe listening to this as a recording, right? They're thinking of their own infrastructure, many of them, right? And a lot of that infrastructure is not brand new, right? I mean, this is infrastructure that's been in operation for decades, for some of them, right? So how do you coach them? How do you help them understand, or not even understand, but help them, help explain to them kind of where things are going? Because in the process, we're seeing all kinds of new technologies emerge as we start to look at infrastructure and how it's changing, but also as the application architectures are changing, right? And so we're seeing this real pressure, almost from the board level, for, they call it, what do they call it? Digital, what's the term that?
Digital transformation.
Digital transformation, right? I mean, that's the board level phrase, right? You know, but when you get into it, it's really about application architectures and how do you think about your application, which brings up a lot of questions about continuous delivery, for example, and how do you think about continuous delivery? And CI not necessarily does rhyme with in this new world. So I'm just curious on how do you even begin to start explaining this to people?
So this is a really big question. A lot of great terms in there. So I think most of our engineering colleagues and our development colleagues understand the ultimate goal is CI/CD, right? And the reason we want that is for more agility and faster ability to evolve more quickly and be more responsive. So the ultimate goal is CI/CD, and our engineering colleagues understand that very well because they've been doing Agile for a long time. They understand what it means to reduce development cycles. They also understand containers really well. They have been, forget cloud native, forget microservices. Developers have now for several years been containerizing things, and they do that because they understand it's small, it's fast, it's easy, it's an infrastructure that makes it easier for them to do what they've already been doing for a long time, better, faster, cheaper. And so they understand that too. Okay, so now what we're giving them with these platforms is the ability to leverage that new infrastructure. And as we develop expertise with containers and understand them better, and with Kubernetes as the platform that's evolving as a platform for orchestrating those, we can start to see that there are new and exciting ways that we can really maximize the value of that containerization. And that's an evolution as an industry that, as we mature our understanding of containers through our experience working with them, we can start to see what more they can do. And the next step for people then is to think about, well, how can I really do more? Can I re-architect my existing applications in a different way? Can I refactor them in a way that's going to make them more amenable to this CI/CD, break them up into smaller pieces? Can I build new applications in a way, microservices-based, that's going to allow me to, again, accelerate that delivery by moving each piece through the process independently? So those questions are questions that we're seeing people wrestling with now, because they've sort of got the nuts and bolts of Docker down. We know how to build containers, right? And now the operations teams are saying, okay, we've got Kubernetes to start orchestrating them, and we're back to the developers. How am I going to start to take the next step, which is how am I going to re-architect and how am I going to rebuild? So the path forward, I think, is sort of, it's not set, it's evolving very much, but certain things have happened. Containerization has happened. And now we're at the next step, which is how do I start to change those architectures, and how do I start to change my process too? So how do I move more into a DevOps process? And that's where Cloud Foundry already tells us, we have best practices, we have processes, we have a way that's proven that we know can help you through that next step and really give you a giant leap forward. So there's some guidance.
Yeah, well, let's ask a question for the audience, and we'll go to you, Ken.
Yeah, we got a couple questions here first.
Hey, good morning. Is there any good reference projects combining the Cloud Foundry, Kubernetes, and CI/CD? You just described, considering that I'm familiar with Kubernetes, but not so with the Cloud Foundry. So are there any suggested place or a silver bullet GitHub project or something that a person like me can start and be mastery in a day? So,
Are there any Kubernetes projects in Cloud Foundry? Absolutely. There's so many projects that are going on right now. There's a bunch of proposals that went out in December for some new efforts around that are being worked on here. SUSE, IBM, and SAP are leading the charge on a couple of them around the pluggable scheduler work and the shared service catalog work. But there's a lot of other projects that are happening also in the extensions. So, and we would, and I know I said this yesterday, I'm going to keep harping on this all for the rest of the week, is more contributors. We need more people like you participating and helping shape that. Because, to Jan's point, this is evolving quickly. And what do you as users and developers want to see? And where does it need to go? And I think that's the important driver for how all these projects go forward.
Is there a good spot to go and start looking at the existing projects for reference? Is there a good place?
Git, repo, or CFDev mailing list.
Yes. I wanted to add on the previous question about whether containers is the new virtualization, and to speak about how we think about cloud native as well, which containers is one piece of cloud native, right? Containers is what allows you to separate the application from the OS, right? You package everything in a very lightweight model, but when we think about what we call the high cloud or with all the layers of abstraction, when I'm thinking about cloud native, it's also about automation, self-healing systems, and it's not just the CI/CD, it's also how you manage your environment in production. And yesterday on stage I said that you can modernize every workload, and by saying it I think that you can, of course it's a matter of how much you can modernize that workload, but if you have the right monitoring systems, for example, and the right automation based on that, and a system that knows how to evolve, you also get modernization, because at the end it's all about our own team velocity, both dev and ops, how quickly we can work, how quickly we can make sure that the service is up and running, right? When we talk about cloud native, this is the things we care about, how quickly we push new products, and I think this is what I would say to the Cloud Foundry community, because those are the primitives that you're already familiar with, right? Primitives of abstractions, and just think of where else you can find those kind of abstractions. This is where I would start looking.
You have another question?
Yes.
Hi, this is Naresh from General Motors. I have a quick question. A lot of companies are evaluating, we've been using Cloud Foundry for a while, and we are looking at Kubernetes and Docker. So there is some commonality between them, the build packs and how the build packs convert into a droplet that is an immutable object versus a Docker image that is checked into a repository. There's commonality and there are different ways. One is opinionated, another is more free, right? So do you think at some point people will start using Docker more exclusively than have a mix of these? And if so, what do you recommend? What is I see some benefits in the marketplace that will make application developers get into Cloud Foundry much easier than learning curve for Docker. But once they've got over that curve, would you see people ever wanting a build pack and customizing a build pack versus creating a Docker file, use things from the repository and just start converging completely into Docker world? Because I see this because I have to guide teams to decide which to use, which technology.
Well, I think I liked Joanna's answer on that earlier, actually. There is no one singular application workload that a technology solves everything. There is never going to be one technology solution that solves all of your problems. Particularly if you're a large enterprise or a large organization, or even a startup that has, maybe hundreds of thousands of different types of workloads that you're trying to manage. And I think that it calls for a variety of technology choices to solve the right need. And I think we started talking about this last year when people started asking a lot about Kubernetes, and even a couple of years that when Docker came up a lot. It's really the right tool for the right job, and understanding what you're solving for first. And I think when we talk a lot about agile and continuous delivery, what we're really saying is identifying the business outcome that you want and then architecting towards that. as opposed to trying to find a technology solution and then using whatever you have to solve the business problem. And I think it's really about iteration and development, but agility is really about solving the business problem.
Since you brought up startups, I think your question hints at the interesting fact that startups do not consider Cloud Foundry at all for the most part. We talk a lot about modernization and digital transformation, but the startups are going right to Kubernetes and Google GKE or AWS or something like that. They're maybe using Spinnaker now or something else to build. So it's that I think is an area where Cloud Foundry could do maybe a lot more going forward.
Oh, yeah. We could do a lot more. I mean, one of the challenges is that, and I think anyone that's a long-time user in this room knows that Cloud Foundry is very big. It has a very big footprint. And if you're a startup and you're only worried about a couple of VMs, Cloud Foundry is a difficult choice for you to make. And I think a lot can be done to make Cloud Foundry smaller and easier to get started with. But the problem with Cloud Foundry historically has been is all of the moving pieces that are part of that. It's not just the elastic runtime, it's not just container orchestration, it's identity management, it's logging, it's metrics, it's auditing, it's all of those things that are packaged in. But I think there's been a lot of starts to make it a smaller footprint. Several years ago, Lattice project, there was a micro PCF project, so there's been a lot of iterations to work on that, and I think I'd love to see more work on that this year.
And to expand on that, one area that, again, within SUSE that we have been working on is that area in particular. So one way that we can shrink the footprint of Cloud Foundry is by containerizing it. So we have taken Cloud Foundry and we deployed in a containerized mode, and now we have, instead of running Cloud Foundry in a larger VM, we're running it in a very small and very efficient container. So
are you running Cloud Foundry as a microservice then, in essence?
We're running it as a service-oriented architecture on Kubernetes. Yeah, so the components of Cloud Foundry are themselves containerized, and then they are managed by Kubernetes. So you asked earlier about this modern infrastructure. This is getting at that idea. We can take that power of Cloud Foundry and put it on a modern infrastructure, and that helps us a little bit with this issue of shrinking its size.
That's actually a great point. Thanks for that.
All right, we have another question.
And when you have Cloud Foundry as a service, you don't really care anymore about the footprint. So you could still pull in, you could still just work from there to get the startups to join you.
Which there are. I mean, IBM, Atos, SAP, all of them offer services towards that. It's just been, I think we also suffer from a little bit of a messaging problem around that audience too, in terms of how we tell the story towards startups, which is a very different story. We've historically really focused on the enterprise or mid-market.
So I like the SUSE model of putting the container into the container. A little redundant, perhaps, and I'm wondering when we can rip out the guts of Cloud Foundry and replace Diego and Garden with Kubernetes and Docker.
I saw some people in the back of the room raise their hands at that. They were real excited.
We're doing that in our talk at 12:05.
One more time, Jill, so the whole room can hear you.
Very happily. Come to our talk at 12:05. I'm pretty sure it's 12:05, which would be embarrassing if not. Check the schedule. We're doing a demo, CF push, end-to-end, no Diego, all Kubernetes for staging and scheduling.
Very cool.
So
Thank
for
you.
those of you that didn't hear that, come to a talk at 12 to hear more about that topic.
Yeah. One of the questions I get a lot from I'm with Gartner. A lot of the questions I get are whether or not we can deploy stateful workloads into our containers. Maybe you can give me some advice about deploying databases in big data systems and massive multi-terabyte type things.
So of course, it always depends on the use case. We do have, within Kubernetes, also on GKE, many users are deploying stateful workloads. Actually, it was announced back in 2016 as beta already. We have native Kubernetes support for Spark, for example. Depends on the database, right? I will not go. There are some examples. For example, if you go to Helm and you can see different charts of best practices. So Helm is a package manager in the Kubernetes ecosystem. And we are testing it release after release, and it has some best practices of how to deploy different type of workloads and package them on top of Kubernetes. And usually what I would say, it depends how you do trade-offs between maybe performance or cost-effective and consistency. Okay, and depends on the size. What we hear many users, they prefer to run everything on Kubernetes because it's just simply easier, right? Having the same playbook for everything, for all their environments, wherever they go, it works well. We also see, by the way, when talking about cloud native, that many will just use managed services, right? So you don't really need to use and build your own database on Kubernetes, but you can just use whatever, if it's Cloud SQL, or whatever managed service you choose and evolve. So this is, again, when I'm thinking about composable system, it's also how do you start using other services in the ecosystem.
I would just love to get a clarification what we mean by ripping the guts out.
Oh yeah, I'm kind of curious about that myself.
Well, okay, so Cloud Foundry has a container system inside it called Garden. It doesn't use Docker, it uses Garden. And it has its own orchestration and scheduling system, which is called Diego. So if we rip out Garden and Diego and replace it with Docker and Kubernetes, we suddenly have the Cloud Foundry experience, which I think most of the people in this room really like, but it's running directly onto a Kubernetes type platform.
Got 2 thumbs up in the back. I guess that's will be the, so the discussion.
I'm going to actually let Jules answer this question because this is something he's actually working on right this very second.
Yeah, number one, I should say I am the project lead of Garden. And I agree, let's delete everything. So yeah, I actually agree. I think CF Push is all about the user experience and always has been. And scheduling is a commoditized thing. For a long time it made sense to have our own scheduler because no one really knew where that was going to land. And it was faster for us just to have our own thing. I think personally now we should do it. And at 12:05 we have a demo, end-to-end, CF Push, all on Kubernetes. Come along and see it. I think we hope to propose it as an incubator sometime soon.
So then...
Oh, and apparently it's in the demo theater in the afternoon as well, for anyone foolish enough to miss it at 12:05.
Actually, could you say that again for the microphones?
So I'm holding a demo theater at sometime in the afternoon. I think it's like 4:30 or something. Just look it up on the schedule, and that demo that basically shows the CF Push on Kubernetes will also be part of that, just in case anyone is already blocked at the 12 o'clock talk. The 12 o'clock talk goes way more deep, because it's like 45 minutes just about that topic, or 30 minutes. The demo theater is much shorter, but 2 opportunities to see that today.
Yeah, Frederic would like to ask something or say something.
We're talking a lot about demos here and examples, and is this actually an official project? Is this happening now, or are we just playing with this like, people used to do OpenStack on Kubernetes or something like that?
It's about to become an official project.
Because people are going to actually work on it, right?
People are already working on it, and we are in the process of getting this under the official umbrella of the foundation. The last few steps are still missing on that, but it's happening.
Yeah, it was actually proposed December when the proposals went out, and that's why, to answer the other question, get on CF Dev. These proposals are going on CF Dev. This is where the conversations happen. Each and every one of you, if you're on that mailing list, you get to review all of these proposals, and when they're proposed, you can work on them. And this open source technology only moves as fast as people that are working on it and writing code. So if this is something you are excited about, get involved and work out with Simon and Jules and Björn. I see Björn back there because they're trying to drive this.
I always do this to Alex and ask questions, but is there a counter push? Are people saying, I really love my garden?
My garden, yeah. Who uses garden in here? And probably almost everyone here, probably, you know? I mean, obviously, yeah.
Everyone loves garden. So for what it's worth, I think it. I see these as side by side. It's kind of like Docker did. You can choose Kube if you've already got a big investment in Kubernetes. Absolutely, that makes sense to have one operator experience between both. If you really just want a Cloud Foundry and an integrated thing, you might still want to have Diego and all that stuff. So I don't actually see it as replacing, but I do think it's. You can't ignore the fact that lots of people are already running Kube for CFCR or for their functions thing. They already have to operate it, and we should let them do that because it's a commodity now. So I don't think it replaces it, and I will go on record, I love both Garden and Diego. But I don't think everyone should have to agree with me.
So there'll be like this stripped out version, but then there'll be the version that people know and are familiar with who've been using Cloud Foundry for some time?
Yeah, I mean, I would think for quite a while, just by the nature of software, Diego will be a lot more feature complete until we get parity with the Kube solution, right? So you'll make a choice. In the Docker ecosystem, Swarm has some features which Kube doesn't, and vice versa. If this is approved, which I hope it will be, I would expect the same thing to be the case, and people can make a decision about which features on each are more important, and you know, if the operator experience they get of having one operator experience outweighs the features that they'll lose from not having Swarm, Diego initially.
But I think to really put a finer point on this, I know we've kind of gotten into the weeds a little bit on the tech, but realistically, at the end of the day, we're trying to give developers the best platform. And the technology underneath that absolutely has to evolve. It has to continue to grow and change. The technology is changing. And, you know, when Cloud Foundry first started in 2010, a lot of these technologies didn't exist. Docker wasn't around, Kubernetes wasn't around. There was a lot of technologies that were built because they didn't exist. And I think there's an opportunity to take advantage of changes in technology in the marketplace, and I think it has to continue to do so.
We have another question.
Yes. After all these conversations, do you feel that CFCR is proper part of Cloud Foundry community? Because I heard often, very often even today, that we have Cloud Foundry and Cloud Foundry application experience, and we have Kubernetes. And for me, it feels like, okay, this Kubernetes thing is not yet full part of Cloud Foundry. It's like experimental, I would say, but not, when you think about Kubernetes, you don't think it's Cloud Foundry, it's like something else.
Well, I agree. Right now, it is running, CFCR runs alongside application runtime. But one of the things we've been talking a lot about is this isn't a layer cake. And I'd love for Hin to add on to this because we talked about this yesterday, is it's not, there is no layers here. It's not just the layers of technology as you're moving up from the infrastructure up. And I think software-defined everything is changing that. And I know you had a really great story about that yesterday in terms of Kubernetes isn't just one thing.
So definitely it's not a layer cake when we think about it. And as I said, like there will be other things also. So there will be a Cloud Foundry and workloads running straight on Kubernetes, and also workloads running on VMs. Okay, in our environment, I think, you know, when you think about the complexity of our environment, so our goal, definitely my team and Google, is to think about how you manage all of those environments in a consistent way that allows you to have the velocity that you expect. And I think that what Cloud Foundry team, and actually it's, you know, it's amazing that you can actually swap, for example, move something out and put something in. It says a lot about the software, because software has to evolve. It's to see whether Cloud Foundry can start using more and more primitives, maybe, that are coming from Kubernetes. If it's Kubernetes-style APIs, maybe doing some, in Kubernetes we have ways to extend it. What's something called custom resource definitions is how you build new resources and you build operators to manage them. So I think that Cloud Foundry has an opportunity to use those extensions, and it will feel more maybe Kubernetes native. So that's something I would suggest doing.
Question here.
Yeah, you mentioned the proposals going out and CFDev and really asking for engagement from those developers. I'm just curious, when we talk about Kubernetes and Cloud Foundry, right? And you mentioned Kubernetes has had a huge amount of developer community support. Is there anything you've learned from that, or is there anything that you're trying to do in the Cloud Foundry community to help drive that kind of adoption or engagement?
Well, starting with begging at summits for people to come. We're working, from the foundation standpoint, we're working to make it easier for people to get engaged. And Graham, and you'll know this, there's the Cloud Foundry developer community, particularly the committer base, it operates a little bit different than other open source projects. And there is a bit of a bar to be part of the committer base. So getting people to that point is great. Where we're starting right now is trying to get people engaged in the community and then laddering them up. Hey, you know what, contributors. In fact, do a pull request, sign a CLA, really give us that feedback. In fact, one of the metrics that I heard earlier this week is over 30% of the contributions that are coming in via the pull requests via contributors. So it's actually not just the committers driving this forward, and that's been really exciting. And I'd love to see more of that. Watching the Kubernetes community really grow and thrive has been really, really exciting to see that. And I think we're constantly pushing for a continued diversification of contributors and getting more people, more companies part of that, because that's what makes it move forward. That's what really brings the best ideas to the table. That's the whole power of open source. Hen talked about open standards, but really bringing all of your ideas to the table is really what makes Cloud Foundry interesting and innovative. And so we're trying to encourage more of that.
Jen, if I just asked Jennifer, I'm curious on how you guys are, at SUSE trying to foster community, both for, because there's a Cloud Foundry story and there's also a Kubernetes story here.
Yeah.
And they're very much different communities. And Matt Curry brought this up yesterday when he was saying, hey, there's a lot of use in the enterprise for Kubernetes, there's a lot of use for Cloud Foundry, but these communities are operating on different technologies.
Yeah. So first I would say it's really wonderful to have this conversation. I think the conversation has evolved a lot in the past year, past 6 months, even more. A year ago, most people considered Kubernetes and Cloud Foundry to be completely independent and competing platforms. All right? People did not understand the way we are starting to as an industry now, that they actually have a lot of complementary value. So that's number one, getting that understanding out through vehicles like this at KubeCon and elsewhere, where we can talk about the differences between these things and how they can be work together. So understanding that these are not necessarily competing platforms is number one. And number two, at SUSE, we go to our cloud. We participate heavily in the Cloud Foundry community. We also participate in the CNCF. So when we go to KubeCon, which we'll be at in 2 more weeks, we'll be talking to people who are already invested in Kubernetes. So Abby is talking about getting people engaged in the contribution and in the projects at Cloud Foundry. We're also interested in getting users interested in the value of Cloud Foundry. So if we go to KubeCon, where people are very excited and already invested in Kubernetes, we can present those people, those customers, with an easy way to now add Cloud Foundry to their environment. So that just makes it easier for them to get started. So what can we do? We can educate people that these are not competing, but they are complementary platforms. And two, we can make it easier to get that momentum around Kubernetes and funnel some of that into Cloud Foundry.
Well, I want to thank the panelists. Thank you very much for participating in the panel. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I want to give a big thanks to the Cloud Foundry Summit for sponsoring, Cloud Foundry for sponsoring this Pancake Breakfast. Thank you very much. And thank you all for those great questions. And now I get to pick. Who's? Oh, okay. We still need to get everyone's tickets. Well, anyway, I want to thank you all. This has been a lot of fun. I think we're going to. Judy, why don't you? Who's gonna pick? No, I'm not gonna pick. No.
900624.
900624. We got a winner! All right, thank you, everyone. We'll see you around the show. Have a good one.
The Cloud Foundry Foundation is our sponsor for our Pancake Breakfast at Cloud Foundry Summit in Boston, Massachusetts. Cloud Foundry is used by enterprises around the globe to automate, scale, and manage cloud applications throughout their life cycle. Learn more about Cloud Foundry at cloudfoundry.org. Listen to more episodes of the NewStack Analysts at thenewstack.io/podcasts. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.